Good afternoon, Abdullah. We're just waiting a few minutes to see if some more colleagues join us. We're quite a small group at the moment. What we've said to previous colleagues, colleague Claire came into the session, Abdullah, that all of these sessions are being recorded. So we'll leave it entirely up to you. If you'd rather be in another session that might have more colleagues in there and take that as a networking opportunity, that's fine. You're more than welcome to stay with us and have a very personalised session and interact with us. But all of the sessions are being recorded, so you'll have a chance to access those at a later date as well. But please do introduce yourself in the chat, Abdullah. Love to hear about your setting and where you're from, and a warm welcome this afternoon. Afternoon, Sarah. Nice to see you. I think I'll make a start then, John. So I'll try and share my screen now. So just let me know if those slides have appeared.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, I can see. I can see the slides just in the corner, but that's
so,
because
you're
my
off a phone. Yeah. So
yes,
hopefully people can see those slides. Yeah.
So
that's showing fine. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thanks, Michael. So good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you this afternoon. Sharing a session, really trying to reflect on the crazy sort of past 18 months that we've had. And I've entitled the session Over the Rainbow. I promise I'm not going to sing, but it's just really great to be with you and sort of to look back, to pause and to take a breath and look back at learning over the past sort of 18 months that we've had through the pandemic, with a particular focus on remote learning, but also parts of this afternoon's session will touch on active recovery and maybe some opportunities, some silver linings that we can take forward to support our students and young people. So my name's Alistair Crawford. I think I know most of the people I've seen taking part in the conference today, but I lead the specialist teaching schools in the city, St Martin's and St Andrews, and also wear a number of different hats as well. So I also work as a regional leader for Whole School Send, both in East Midlands, South Yorkshire and Humber and the North. And another hat I wear is I'm specialist lead for Oak National Academy. And I guess my experiences around remote and online learning has been really rich because of the work I've done with Oak National Academy. So hopefully the opportunity to share some of the great things I've learned with, I've been just inspired by the young people, the families, the professionals that I've had the opportunity to work with across these last 18 months, and really hope to share some of the best things that I've seen sort of moving forward here. And hopefully it will build on some of the messages that you've heard coming through really strongly from this morning, from Andre, from Debs Robinson and Debbie as well, in the messages that they've shared. So just for a couple of minutes, really, at the start of the session, like I say, it's very rare. It's been so busy. The pace of things has been incredible over the last sort of year in schools, hasn't it? And we haven't really had a chance to sort of stop and take a breath almost, it seems. So just want colleagues now on the call just to pause for maybe a minute or so. And again, if you could engage through the chat, that would be brilliant. And my colleague John is going to relay those kind of messages to me. Just what has been your biggest challenge over the last year throughout the pandemic? So what sort of caused you the greatest challenge in school within your role? And hopefully we'll be able to pick some of those things up. So I'll just pause for 60 seconds or so and give colleagues an opportunity to feed back in the chat function. If you're okay, John, to feed, if anything's coming through that chat, if you're okay to relay that to me, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, I think people are still thinking about it.
Oh, no worries then, John. I'll move on and maybe we can revisit those later. So please do feel free to jump in, John, at any point if colleagues have put things into the chat.
No
Thanks,
problem.
John. So just to share some of those challenges and barriers that certainly I've come across. So for me, I think it's been a whole new language to learn, hasn't it? So if we cast our minds back where we were talking about synchronous, asynchronous, hybrid learning, a complete new language. So if I think personally that 18 months ago, Zoom was something that was on the side of my football boots, and I seem to have lived my life on that platform and Teams across this last year or so there. So we've had to get our head around that new language. The pace of change has been incredible. One of the real concerns that we've had, and that existed right at the beginning and carried on through really those lockdown periods, was the issues around devices and data. And there's a real danger for our young people with additional needs, our vulnerable learners, that we were almost doubling down on disadvantage. Well, remember, they didn't have access to laptops, to computers. The cost of data was really significant. So a real fear that young people who already maybe get not the best of deals in comparison to their peers were really struggling with those things there. A real concern for me was around well-being and workload of our staff. So we were looking for, like I say sort of on screen, that elusive 25th hour in the day. The workload of colleagues was incredible, particularly our Senkos and colleagues, leaders of Send that we have on the conference here with us today. The issue around burnout is really, really quite significant. And a recent report around the Senko workload report that came out from Bath Spa shares some of those concerns as well. And we had colleagues who were trying to deliver a remote and online offer at the same time where they were doing lots of face-to-face work in school as well. So massive issues around workload and well-being. Accessibility. Sorry, John.
So are we, yeah, we've got a message here from Claire in the chat, who's put staff struggling with using technology and engaging parents with home learning.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And like I say, we'll have that range of colleagues across our school to those people who are amazing and they're absolutely into their technology, and every app and sort of platform going, it just comes very easily and naturally to them. And we'll have those colleagues who, really struggle to get their heads around the technology. That shift to online and remote learning was a real challenge for them. And also for families as well, Claire. So families who, again, maybe did they have access to the devices? How are they best placed to support their child in the home setting with many of the challenges around there? And we'll touch on those through the session. So thanks ever so much, Claire, and please do continue to engage as we move through the session. That idea around aspiration is a real sort of challenge and issue, and the accessibility. So we know that lots of the remote offers, and I'm going to share some statistics with you shortly, were really geared up for kind of our young people in mainstream schools and mainstream settings. And sometimes our students with additional needs were sometimes maybe left behind with some of that. Sometimes they were on the kind of the outside of that, maybe the opportunities weren't the same for them. And finally there, I think we faced as a profession really lots of noise and negativity around. So I think there was lots of challenges around the media. So our colleagues in health and medical settings, so doctors and nurses, colleagues there rightly were lauded and praised throughout the pandemic for the amazing work they did on the front line. It wasn't always the same for colleagues working in schools, for teachers and school leaders. There were lots of questions and almost the blame sometimes came to our door for schools being closed. So we were under fire quite a lot as a profession, and that was quite challenging when we particularly put that into context of that significant workload that people faced. You can see on our screen there's some reports and research from various organisations, from YouGov, from Ofsted, from the Sutton Trust, from the EEF. So lots of reputable organisations really had a look into what remote learning looked like and how that sort of fared from a send and inclusion perspective there. And some quite worrying statistics that you can see on screen. So the fact that 2/3 of disabled children were disengaged from remote learning, really worrying statistics, of young people not being able to focus or engage there. I think one of and you can read through those, I won't go through them line by line, but again, a real concern, that bottom statistic you can see, only 46% of schools are offering additional remote learning arrangements for students with SEND. So we can see how maybe our young people with SEND were an afterthought, and the opportunities, the aspiration, the accessibility just wasn't there in place for them as it would have been for their peers. So really worrying to read those statistics. Just want to share with you some other sorts of concerns from across the pandemic, and I'll touch on a bit later some work, brilliant piece of work, very recent piece of work done by the Youth Sport Trust around active recovery. But we can see in terms of that idea around health and well-being and the impact of lockdown periods. So, you know, we've got statistics from the Institute of Health Equity, the report A Fair and Supportive Society that they put out in 2019, spoke to real concerns around long-term health outcomes for students with additional needs, young people with additional needs. The life expectancy that was less 15 to 20 years less than the rest of society. So again, really stark statistics, and we can see in terms of young people maybe putting on excessive weight during a lockdown period there. So significant numbers. When we start to think about physical fitness and perceptions on physical fitness, how that's got a lot worse, you know, over a lockdown period. So young people that maybe their only time where they would have been active would be in the school day, maybe in physical education or opportunities around the school day at break time and lunchtime. And with that taken away from them, physical fitness has really diminished there. And that one about well-being as well. So young people able to identify that their well-being has been significantly impacted by the pandemic and those multiple lockdown periods. So that idea of active recovery is going to be a really, really important one for us moving forward. And we like to use the words like reconnection and recovery rather than catch up, that maybe points to a deficit sort of model there. So how can we support young people to reconnect and recover from this really sort of horrible time that we've all faced as a country? And there's some brilliant work. I really would signpost the work of Professor Barry Carpenter, who's done an awful lot of across the last year around the recovery curriculum, with the latest bits being really around active recovery and sensory sanctuaries and sports sanctuaries that, again, I'll touch on a bit later. But you can see there again, 67% of young people believe the pandemic will have a long-term negative effect on their mental health. So big jobs for us colleagues working in schools, and how can we support them through that and to recover from those losses? And you can see examples. Losses can mean a number of things to our students and young people, from routine structures, maybe having a birthday. Most of our young people have experienced and lost for them doing the things that they want to do, being away from their friends, missing out on opportunities out in the community, freedoms, all the way through to obviously challenging dynamic in the family with parents losing that for the family, and challenges there through to, sadly, our young people losing family members, whether that's grandparents or parents or friends of the family, and dealing with maybe loss for the first time in that sense. So active recovery is going to be really, really important for us. And again, some more stuff you can see on screen there in terms of that change in the way our young people have engaged and interacted, the way they play, not having the opportunity to be outside in those open green spaces playing with their friends, and students being isolated. And again, we find that our young people with SEND maybe are more isolated even than their peers have been across this period. And again, it's heartbreaking to see that, really, that, you know, a third of students were feeling quite isolated and having to play on their own. Moving forward, though, and apologies for sharing those statistics and maybe bringing the mood down, but I think it's really important for us to get that context. And I promise it gets far more positive from here on in across the session. And we like to say, how do we flip the narrative? And it's so important. And something that we use in school is we say we shout about SEND. So we want to share the amazing things our students and young people, if we reflect back across the pandemic, the amazing resilience that our young people have shown, the brilliant achievements that we've seen, and sometimes the accelerated progress that our students and young people have made. So, I feel so proud of our young people that we think our specialist settings, and lots of our SEND learners have been in school throughout. So when schools were closed and young people were in lockdown, our specialist settings were open. Our most vulnerable young people in society still had that offer and were still part of the school community, getting the support they needed. And that's something to be really proud of and celebrate there. I think it's so important we raise the aspiration for our young people. We flip the narrative, the language we use. We need to have that real ambition for our young people with additional needs. And how do we really shout about those amazing role models and share their stories, amplify the great things that they go on to do? Because we absolutely know that kind of you need to see it before you can be it, and that idea. So to have those really strong role models and that alumni maybe coming back into schools, those young people with additional needs who've gone on to those great outcomes, can absolutely inspire the students that we have in our schools. So I'm going to talk a bit about, like I say, my experience with Oak National Academy. It's been a bit of a whirlwind 12 months or so with regards to Oak, where we had a phone call last Easter asking if we would help support with this new thing, the National Academy, and it was going to be to support with a specialist offer there. And we didn't know what it was going to be, but we're just so excited to be a part of it. And that message of having SEND at the heart of what we do, so on such a huge national project, to have a specialist offer for young people with additional needs that sits alongside as an equal with the mainstream offer, I think was a really, really exciting thing. And like I say, all too often we hear that SEND is kind of an afterthought or a bolt-on and those things. To have SEND at the heart of Oak's offer was something that we couldn't turn down. So we were a part of that in the early stages, where we were putting together those kind of video lessons together. We then worked on the Oak curriculum for this academic year, and more recently, from last September, I took on the role of specialist lead for Oak and how we will develop that offer moving forward. So it's been a crazy year. It's been an exciting year. Like I say, a bit of a whirlwind, but it's been a privilege to work with some amazing colleagues from across the country. And again, hope to share some of that learning with you this afternoon. So just a bit about the Oak offer that we've had. And again, some of the colleagues at the conference today, I'm sure, have used Oak in some guises. So one thing we were really keen to do is to make the mainstream offer inclusive and accessible for all young people. So we worked with our mainstream counterparts in terms of how they would make the language accessible, their use of visual supports there, the kind of activities, their demonstrations, the modeling of activities, how they could put all of those things together to make it a really inclusive, accessible offer for students and young people. But of course, there was that recognition that there would be those young people who needed that bit extra. They needed a bespoke and personalized curriculum for them to meet their needs. So we put together quite a significant specialist offer. So you can see on screen there, there's over 600 specialist lessons that even include masterclass sessions within there that cover a range of subject areas, from communication and language, from numeracy. We have independent living, creative arts, physical developments, and a really exciting therapy offer, because we were really mindful that for large stages of the pandemic, lots of young people were missing out on those key bits of therapy around speech and language and OT. So a brilliant team put together some sessions around there that families were able to use in the home that were really, really well received. And the way that offer was put together was real flexibility for kind of teachers, for professionals, and families as well. So, Oak is not something, it can never replace that personal relationship that teachers, TAs, and families have. So we very much recognized from an early stage that it was going to be an offer that was going to be translated through those key adults, whether that's families or whether that's professionals in a school setting there. So, and again, it was really exciting to see how it was almost a pick and mix approach, that people were taking those sessions that were of most interest and motivating for the students they were working with or a child at home there. So lots of different ways in which colleagues use the Oak offer. And in terms of the scale and reach to show that, I suppose, the impact of online and remote learning is there are now, I think, as it stands, this slide always dates very quickly because the Oak offer continues to be really, really popular. But I think there's over 130 million lessons that have been delivered now, which just kind of blows my mind in terms of the impact that it's had. And you can see there 4.5 million students learning with Oak. It's just amazing to see how many schools and young people and families that have been supported, and that offer alongside with the personalised stuff that schools have been doing themselves, I think has worked really, really well for students. And through a really challenging time, it's amazing to think that learning has still been able to take place. The reach of the offer and online and remote learning has been significant. So supporting young people all across the United Kingdom and even as far away as Australia and Beirut. So we heard a lovely story where colleagues on the call will remember the blast that they had in Beirut, where sadly, the damage around the city and schools and infrastructure was really, really damaged. And some of those things are still being rebuilt now. And we've heard of young people who are using the Oak online offer and a school using that to support their learning there. So a really significant reach. And one of the nicest things for us has been that, that 92% of users would recommend. So there's still a real appetite for Oak to continue. I know there are conversations with the DFE that are ongoing in terms of, like I say, people don't want to see that offer just disappear. They want to continue to be able to access those resources to support their school moving forward. And we'll touch a bit more on maybe those silver linings and things that worked really well across the pandemic as we move through the session today. In and amongst those statistics, like I say, those huge statistics, I've been really fortunate to hear some of the personal stories as well of what that's meant to families and what that's meant to people. So it's really important to mention some lovely stories that I've been really privileged to hear in how remote and online learning, not just from Oak, but from school communities as well, has really pulled young people and families through those lockdown periods. So it's important to give credit and to reference those. The offer and remote learning has been used in such a creative and innovative way across lockdown periods in the pandemic. So I just want to share some of those things that we've seen. The obvious one there at the top in terms of young people who are needing to isolate, and certainly we're feeling that quite keenly across Derby City again at the moment. So in that sort of third wave that we're facing, with hearing lots of, particularly with our secondary colleagues, where positive tests are coming in and young people and teachers and professionals are having to isolate for those periods. Bubbles are being closed. So that need to be able to revert back to that online and remote offer to provide something for students having that 10-day period at home. So still obviously a massive use of that going forward. A really exciting thing that we heard, and again, something we never maybe could have envisaged when we started out, is the idea of flipped learning and team teaching. So with flipped learning, we've had teachers and TAs who are accessing the same sort of online lessons. So they'll maybe share their screen and they'll play an Oak lesson, and then they'll pause at various points and they'll ask those questions. They'll provide that scaffolding. They'll add that additional supporting to make that really bespoke for the young people who they're working with. And again, I think it's quite a cool thing to think that we're able to almost team teach through that sort of platform and make the very best of that offer there. And again, obviously we can think of how that will support schools when there's a real sudden need for young people to go home and isolate, and that ability to be able to access a high quality online immediately and have those things in place. It is really, really good. It continues to be very useful for colleagues and schools and families across the country there. I think an important message would be, and again, that idea of flipped learning and team teaching, Oak can do many things, and there's some amazing resources on there from some brilliant specialists who delivered those sessions. It will never replace relationships. It's not good enough to just say, okay, well, we'll learn from those Oak lessons, we'll set those for students. It's that personal touch that really enhances those lessons. It's that communication between professionals and the young people and the families that really makes that offer come to life, in my opinion. If we think about colleagues and the need maybe to work across the pandemic outside of their specialism. And again, when we've had really tight bubbles in schools, so maybe we have a specialist teacher, a DT or a PE specialist in one bubble, and they're unable to cross those bubbles to support young people. The Oak resource to have a look at those lessons themselves to get some ideas. Or in some cases, colleagues have even played those lessons in school. And again, the teachers and the support staff have been able to help students and again, translate that lesson for the young people who they're working with. So again, that feeds into that next sort of point around CPLD and training and how that really has supported school communities to have a look at, to get an idea, a window into that pedagogy of other professionals from various settings around the country. So what can we learn from each other? And collaboration's been a huge theme across this conference today for us, hasn't it? If we think about moving forward, perhaps, so that idea of setting homework, perhaps in holiday periods, we know that our students with additional needs, sometimes we see a regression in learning, don't we? Even across the weekend, young people will struggle in that return to school on a Monday, but particularly maybe across those extended holiday periods as we approach the 6 weeks breaks in summer. You know, sometimes families will say that's a really challenging time. And to be able to have some of those activities and ideas and resources that continue to engage their child with learning has had a big impact. And we've heard that already from last summer and from the Easter breaks and from the Christmas holidays. That's something that's been really well received by families. So again, the ways in which we can use that moving forward. And the idea, again, feedback that we've had, and research will tell us that repetition and overlearning has had a massive positive impact on our young people with additional needs. That ability to stop the video, to pause, to rewind, to watch it again and again and again has led to some brilliant learning and deep embedded learning as well there. So again, a question for us colleagues is how can we take that learning and move it forward beyond COVID when we move over the rainbow perhaps? We know that in ITT, our trainee teachers have had challenges like never before in their profession. So again, the resilience they've showed has been really quite inspiring. They've struggled with that ability to see other teachers, to get into each other's classroom and to really hone their craft. And again, really pick up on those different thoughts, those pedagogies that they would have typically seen around school. So I think the ability for those colleagues to be able to go on to watch some of those online videos, lots of universities we work with have really gone on. They've observed those online lessons, those recorded lessons. They've had discussions around them. They've pulled them apart. They've taken some of those ideas. And recently, Oak put together some ITT videos where the teachers of the Oak lessons actually deconstruct their lessons. So they take you through their thought processes. They almost provide a commentary on the lesson, why they did the things they did, why they chose those resources and those activities. And we were really fortunate to be involved in two of those. There's one send in mainstream and there's a specialist video. So again, I really recommend those. They're really interesting look to have a bit of a window into kind of why those lessons were created the way they are. And particularly for our early career teachers, I think they can be a huge support. And finally there, I think lots of colleagues have used the Oak curriculum to have a look in there. So that opportunity to, again, tap into experts all across the country and see what their thoughts are around curriculum and how can we maybe reflect on our own curriculum models? How can we, again, take the best ideas and then make them relevant and work really, really well for our own schools and settings there? So again, there's some brilliant things there that can be used in some really creative and innovative ways. I think and again, we must reflect on this as we learned from the pandemic, there was a risk, I think, at times across the last year where we became so structured. So I talked about the media earlier and the pressure to have 5 hours of live teaching every day. And it was going to be incredibly structured and what that would look like. And I think we'd all agree spending lots of time and hours on Zoom and Teams and meetings, you know, it does absolutely impact on your ability to concentrate and the headaches we've all had and so on. So it's really important to sort of celebrate the serendipitous learning that we've seen throughout the pandemic. So, you know, that idea that when we did have snow, and it sounds funny saying that in the sort of summer holidays, but when we did have snow, schools being able to set challenges for young people to build snowman, go and have fun in the snow, setting those things around the school sort of day or college day with young people who were maybe making their own lunch. They were helping out in the home more than they maybe would usually do. And then the ability to come together online and eat together and have that social time with their friends. So really important. We value that serendipitous learning that we've seen across the pandemic. Something in terms of inclusion, and Debbie and other colleagues this morning mentioned a lot about high quality first teaching and the need to make things inclusive, accessible and aspirational for our young people with SEND. So a really valuable tool that I certainly have around school and have it around my office, and a really good prompt for me is the from Activity Alliance's STEP principle, but we put C in front of it because I think communication is so important. And just to take you through that, really, it's just basically, I think, when we're planning activities, when we're planning our curriculum, what the school day looks like, the environment, to stop and consider what it looks like in terms of communication. So there might be things like when we're talking to our students and young people, we've mentioned the visual supports. Sometimes we need to reduce the language. We can be incredibly sometimes delivery, and that can cause really in terms of how they access those messages. So maybe reducing language, those key messages, the clarity around the things we're saying, allowing for more processing time can be really important for our students and young people. It's so important we think.
Sorry to interrupt, Alistair. We can't see you on the screen at the moment.
You can't see me, John, or you can't see the slides?
We can't see you. We can hear you, but yeah, just to let you know that we can't see you.
Okay, well, I'll plow on anyway, John. So I think
no problem.
Yeah, people aren't missing much. I'm looking very haggard.
You've come back.
Okay.
You've come back. Excellent. Brilliant.
Oh, that's good. Like I say, people aren't missing much, John. Looking very haggard and tired at the moment. So, but anyway, I'll move forward with the C step regardless. So yeah, thinking about also the space. So the environment. So how can we adapt our environment to make things more inclusive and accessible? So I think I'm a PE specialist and a PE teacher at heart. So thinking about how do we make more space maybe for our young people who are using walkers or wheelchairs, and just by increasing the space and changing the environment a bit. So our young people who are visually impaired, thinking about resources. So we might want to use a balloon with ricing that makes a sound and gives some feedback when we're playing some of those sports like volleyball, for example. That would help to make that inclusive and accessible. We can think about the task. So how do we scaffold the task? What can we put in place to make sure that activity is accessible? The equipment, so thinking about the resources that we use. So we're all very up to date in terms of how we'll use overlays, how we'll use slopes, how we'll use those different resources to support young people to access and really do particularly well and achieve within our sessions. And then finally, obviously, really importantly, how people can support us as well. And when I say people, that can look very differently. So that might be key adults in the classroom environment. It might be the teacher. It might be the support staff, but it can also be peers as well. Sometimes we know the risk of maybe having that Velcro member of staff who kind of oversees the young people can be detrimental. So young people having the ability to work with aspirational peers can have a huge impact on them and really bring them on in their learning in all aspects of school life there. So we say with that C-step principle, if you have that at the heart of all you do, and I guess this is a challenge for colleagues today, is I think if we enact that successfully, everything we do in school should be inclusive and accessible. There shouldn't be anything that a young person, regardless of their needs, isn't able to take a full and active part in. And like I say, I really would recommend having this as a poster around school for colleagues to have that in their planning files as really good prompts for them. And again, it comes back to that idea of think send. If we have send at the heart of all we do, we know that that's going to work really well for all of our students and young people, not just those with SEND. So some of the things, some of the adjustments you might put in through C-STEP, they will be vital for some students, but they'll be valuable for all students who you're working with, regardless of their needs. Just something to think about now as we move forward. So we talked about some of those challenges and barriers maybe that we faced. There have been some things that have worked really, really well across the pandemic. And it's really important, I think, we don't lose those things that have been really successful. We need to make sure that we take those silver linings forward and the things that have worked really, really well. So I'll continue to share some of my thoughts, but again, please do engage through the chat function, and I'm sure John will sort of cut in and share any thoughts that he has as things come through with the chat. But really important to reflect on those things that have worked really well and what can we take forward to really support our students. So I like to, again, I don't like to think about catch-up, but how can we turbocharge recovery and make our schools even better places for young people to learn and develop. One of the great things that we had with Oak across the pandemic, so a real issue for us was that as we were approaching Christmas time, young people were sharing that sense of loss again in terms of the things they really like to do. So those things like the Christmas concerts, they're going to a pantomime, the parties, the Christmas films, all those amazing things where young people would come together with their peers. They were missing out on that because they weren't able to do those things this year. And again, we shared earlier that idea of being active and the health challenges that our students have faced through the pandemic. So we had with Oak a series of events, and one that included the Shout About Send Festive 5K. We've had the Shout About Send 5K, and some colleagues maybe with us today will have participated in that in St Martin's pre-COVID, where I think we had about 200 people who came and took part in a mixed ability event on a Saturday in school. So a bit of a fun run, as it were. Well, this time I'm really, again, proud of everyone involved in this, that we had 6,500 young people from across the country of all ages, of all abilities, who took part in the Shout About Send 5K. And being active for young people, for some of our students, that was trying really hard in a physio session or just managing to take a few steps, as you can see on some of the photos on screen there now. For some young people, that was doing a super fast 5 kilometers. But again, that connectivity that young people felt, the motivation to be active and to get out and to exercise was a really positive thing. But moreover than that, that feeling connected to young people, not only in their school or schools in their locality, like Derby City, and lots of schools across the city took part, but all over the country. They had young people as far north as Newcastle and people as far south as Dover who were taking part in this event. And they were posting things online, on Twitter, on school sites. They were encouraging each other. They were sharing in success. They were challenging each other. That was a real silver lining from me. And again, that thought of how do we take these things further forward? So once we kind of come out of the pandemic, how do we make sure that our young people still feel connected to that wider community, and also our schools? How do we still make sure we're part of that wider community of practice? Again, calling the session sort of over the rainbow today. So just to share some of those things that I think have worked really well, and we certainly will be looking to take forward positively from St Martin's. So young people who've been able to kind of self-pace a bit with their remote and online learning has really helped to reduce anxieties. Some young people have done really well learning in the home, and that's worked really well for them. So we know some of our students with SEND can have quite a stressful journey into school. So maybe that's coming by bus or by taxi, or having a significant commute to school. That can be quite stressful, and it can take them a period of time to over that, where we found sometimes across lockdown periods and remote learning, young people taking away that stress, that anxiety, the ability to self-pace, they've actually made accelerated progress, and they've gone on some great outcomes. So again, thinking, what can we learn from that? I think connectivity and relationships. And again, it's great to be on this conference today, where I think in the city, our collaboration and connectivity from and specialist schools has never been as good as it is now. I think our connectivity across the city is something to really celebrate, and again, something that we can hopefully build on even further as we move forward. That idea of curriculum. So I think we've had a national conversation around the type of curriculum. Now, we know things are really bespoke and personalised, and rightly so, for our young people with additional needs. But I think never before have we came together and had a conversation about what's the most important thing. We've started to think about those longer term outcomes. What does success look like for our students with additional needs? And maybe, yeah, the academic stuff is absolutely really important, and we should continue to have the highest aspirations, but health, well-being, interaction, communication, employability, we've started to talk about those things and shape our curriculum accordingly, which again, I think is only a positive thing moving forward. Student and family voice, I think, has been louder than it ever has been, which is amazing. So again, I like to think of that idea of students and families being pilots and not passengers with their learning there. So if we think of families as being co-educators, haven't they? They've had a window into school and what learning looks like never before. And they've been absolutely essential to the work that we've done, any learning that's taken place across the pandemic. So again, my sincere hope is that we don't just park that once we move out of the pandemic. We absolutely need to build on that. And again, that idea of being pilots and not passengers, and really empower the voice of our families and young people, particularly with additional needs. As sometimes it's too easy, they can be left behind and not part of those things where school communities come together. So how can we amplify the voices of learners and their families? And again, positives that we've seen in terms of use of the technology. So again, the technology has been amazing. So thinking about our transitions, another piece of work from the opportunity area has been the ways in which we've created mini films, inclusive mini films, where SEND learners have been able to showcase the best bits about their school to support young people who are coming up, going from year 6 into year 7, or even younger than that, to get an idea of what does secondary school look like, again, to remove some of those anxieties. We've seen some of our families who would really struggle to come into the school building and attend annual reviews or EHCP meetings, where they've been able to engage really successfully online. So again, how do we take that forward in terms of how we engage with our families and wider communities? Health colleagues have been more successful in bringing health colleagues to HCP meetings. So again, something to really build on. We don't actually physically need to be present for those meetings to happen and to contribute there. So some amazing things with the technology that, again, hopefully we're able to take forward really, really positively. Just the next point, really, to think about preparing for adulthood, and something that's really, really important, a massive focus, something we're doing a lot of work with Whole School Send. I know the DFE are working a lot on this at the moment. And again, that idea of what constitutes long-term success for our students and young people. So thinking about those different areas, and also thinking about them from the earliest possible stages. So some brilliant colleagues at Transition 2, which is a post-19 college in the city, where they say start with the end in sight. And sometimes I think we're guilty of making the mistake. We start to think these things when a young person maybe hits year 10 or 11, or when they're 15 or 16. And for lots of our young people with additional needs, and I'd argue our young people in general, it needs to be a lot earlier than that. So how do we start to build towards those really positive outcomes and think about what long-term success looks like in terms of employability, in terms of those friends and relationships, and being a successful member of the community? We know that independence is so important. And again, we've touched on it so far, that idea of what a healthy lifestyle looks like and how we can support young people into great outcomes there. There are some green shoots of some great practice of this across the city, where some of our schools are doing some of the most amazing things. So if I take employability, we have supported internships. St Martin's, some colleagues here doing some great work around supported internships with the hospital, and also now working with Motorpoint as well. So starting to make a dent in some of those dire statistics around employability, where I think it's something like only 7% of young people with additional needs in our locality will go on to gain meaningful employment. Well, that's a statistic that we need to really smash, and we need to sort of really empower our young people and support them to go on to those positive outcomes. Because if you walk around our schools in the city and you meet some of our amazing learners, they've got huge potential. You'd absolutely want to give them a job. So how can we support those positive outcomes and aspirations from the youngest of ages? So through early years, through primary schools, into secondary, and then beyond into post-16 and into adulthood there. And again, I'll touch a bit more on those ideas of health and the great work of Youth Sport Trust around sports and sensory sanctuaries. So a colleague, Vicky Wells, who's a brilliant colleague, has produced a think piece on this. So again, more than happy to sort of share a link with Jerry and the team. It's well worth a read. There are some fantastic podcasts on this as well that maybe you can have a listen to whilst you're kind of out for a walk or a run, or when you have that quiet time. But that idea of a active recovery in those sports and sensory sanctuaries, and how they really support young people across schools, and all of the evidence and research say the more a young person is moving, the more active they are, the more chance they have to exercise. It has a huge impact across all areas of school life. So it supports them to regulate, it reduces those anxieties, it supports them with their learning as well. So that opportunity to be active, to exercise, to be around their peers, to have those sports and sensory sanctuaries in their setting has a direct impact on their learning in those more core academic subject areas. The social aspect of that, the interacting, the communication, those things are so important and are going to be increasingly important for our students and young people coming out of the pandemic. So really do recommend that think piece and having a listen to those podcasts, and have a look at what that looks like across your school. So have young people got those sanctuaries where they can be active, where their sensory needs can be met? And I think a really important point as well is that we want these spaces to be quite fluid and portable as well. So, young people will spend significant periods of time at home. So can those sanctuaries extend into the home? Can young people really experience that active recovery? How are we sharing that with families? And also, what does that look like in the community as well? So how can we connect young people and their families to opportunities out there in the community? So again, really do recommend having a look at those things that have come out from Youth Sport Trust and seeing how they translate into your setting. A really interesting point that was raised, I think, as well, is the idea of what constitutes attendance. So I was on a conference with colleagues from the All Parliamentary Group and Westminster Insights and Policy Connect. And this question came through in terms of, does a young person have to physically be present to be attending and to be successful within their learning? And that raises a really interesting question for us as colleagues, because as I've mentioned earlier, we've seen some great outcomes for young people across the pandemic. Some young people have absolutely thrived with online and remote learning. Again, it's reduced those anxieties. They've been able to access things. They've had their voice heard through things like a chat function in a way that they maybe never have done before, when we've taken away some of those stresses of the school day. So that poses kind of two questions for me in terms of, well, how do we take away some of those stresses? How do we reduce some of those anxieties that we have in school? But then also in the future, what does our remote online offer look like? And a really interesting point a colleague made, a meeting said, well, if a young person's doing so well with their remote and online learning, and that's really successful for them, it's reducing anxieties, it's supporting them and their families really well. Should that be a reasonable adjustment for us to make sure that we're offering those opportunities? And again, speaking, if colleagues talked of maybe a hybrid offer where young people would access some of their learning at home and some of it in school. Now, I think those conversations with the department and across the country are very, very early stage. And I think there are serious risks attached to those kind of thoughts and that way of working, that hybrid approach, maybe that there would be a real danger maybe of some schools abusing that idea in terms of that's a way in which young people would be kept out of school, and young people who presented challenge or school didn't feel they could meet their need, it would be almost kind of easy to say, oh, well, we'll just offer a remote and online offer instead. And that would absolutely be wrong for students and young people. That opportunity to be in school around peers and their friends is so, so important. And again, Andre talked about the impact of that this morning. But I think it is a really interesting point to consider moving forward in terms of how do we use online remote learning to enhance our offer as a school. So what does that look like, again, across holiday periods? What does that look like? So if I think of, things like a young person who's learning a new strategy in maths, perhaps, and we know sometimes that can be a real challenge and they take that home and parents have maybe used different approaches. Have we got the ability where we can just film ourselves doing that in classroom for 5 minutes and young people can access that at home so they can see those same things with their parents to develop their learning? So there's lots of things to talk about and think about here, but I'm sure colleagues can see there's great potential in terms of how we can use that online and remote offer moving forward. We know that in the past, a young person who's been maybe poorly, or maybe they've been injured or had an operation and have missed really extended periods of time in school. And we can all, I think, share those stories of where we'd be scrambling around trying to get learning packs together and pieces of paper to get them sent home to the family or sent to hospital. Well, again, having that ability, that online, the materials, the resources from places like Oak National Academy, That doesn't need to happen anymore, does it? We've got those things we can fall back, we can turn to. We've got this new skill set as we move forward. And again, that's maybe something to consider, that idea of over the rainbow. How can we, that idea, and again, hate to use politician speak, but build back better. How can we really move forward positively and turbocharge that recovery and change our schools and change our offer for the better? So certainly some things to kind of think on as we move forward. So that brings us to really pretty much the end of my session. Again, it's been great to be part of this conference today, and with an inspiring group of colleagues across the city who've done the most amazing work. And again, just very much inspired by everything you've all done across the pandemic to support students and families across our city. I'm very proud to call you my colleagues. Just like to flag the Whole School Send community of practice. So I mentioned earlier, I work across the East Midlands, South Yorkshire and Humber team. Please do take the few minutes it takes to sign up for the Whole School Send community of practice. It's free to join. There are some amazing resources and tools on there. There's some brilliant webinars. If you go to the Whole School Send YouTube channel, you'll see some great materials on there that will really support, I'm sure, yourself and your wider school community. And also, again, that connectivity with the wider community of practice, I think, can only be a positive thing for us moving forward. So yeah, a massive thank you from me. Young person on screen there from St Andrews, got the most amazing array of superhero outfits, always makes me smile. I've put our Twitter feeds on there, so please do connect with us. We'd love to continue the conversation with you about remote learning, online learning, anything to do with SEND. And again, really privileged to be working with lots of schools across the city as part of the OA and Graduated Response Project. So a massive thanks for all you do and for your time today. And like I say, please do stay connected and look forward to speaking with you very soon. Thanks, everyone.